All right. All right. Welcome to Raise the Bar, the Sky High and Fly Jump Camps podcast. My name is Troy Haynes, and I'm your host. Former UCLA high jumper, and now I just work with athletes, great and small, tall and small. And we are trying to find the best ways to jump higher, farther, faster, and better. And my guest today is Dario. I did not ask how to say your last name. Is it Saisan? How do you say that?
Yeah, English version is probably Saisan.
Saisan. Okay. And Dario is we're going to let Dario explain exactly what he does with you guys. I first saw Dario's feed on my Instagram, and I saw him doing incredible work with plyometrics and rehab and joint stability work, and all those things are points of interest for us here on Raise the Bar. And I asked him if he'd like to be a guest, and he graciously accepted. So here he is. Say hi to everybody, Dario.
Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here. Looking forward to chat with you a little bit.
Absolutely. And so you're all the way in Vienna.
Yeah.
Vienna. Wow. So we found out today by mistake that we're 9 hours apart and not 8, because I told him it was 8 o'clock, and I thought I looked it up on my phone and that we were 8 time zones apart, and it turns out we're 9. So poor Dario was waiting for me an hour ago, and he got back and did some other things, and I got back in touch, said it's 8 o'clock, and so we did end up getting it right. So fortunately, we're here and ready to go now. I was asking Dario, and I'll just ask you again, what was it that got you started in this business?
Well, like most strength coaches, they're either not athletic enough or they get injured, lose all their athleticism, and try to get it back. For me, it was the latter. So when I was 17, I tore my ACL 5 days before our championship game. Right after I learned how to right after I found out that you can actually enhance athleticism in the weight room. And so I tore my ACL, got the surgery. I started rehab. I was rehabbing with a physio out of my town for 3 months. And after 3 months, I was like something intuitively told me that that's not enough. That's not what's going to get me ready for the sport again. So, because all we were doing is squats, deadlifts, 3x12, 4x12, all in the same workout every
Right.
single. So I basically quit on my physio after 3 months of rehab, and I took matters into my own hands. Started reading, started gathering information, doing my own research, and then I actually started an Instagram before I even was a coach. So that was my first mistake, but then I had to catch up on a lot as I learned that there are other coaches out in this world who know a lot more than me, which humbled me. So the Dunning-Kruger effect hit me really hard. And then I just put my head down, started learning. And fast forward 2.5 years later, I'm here on the podcast speaking to you.
Awesome. So you said championship game. What sport were we playing at that time?
Basketball, and I still play basketball.
You still play basketball. So over in Vienna, how does that work? Here in the United States, we've got youth league basketball. Then the kids will play their local high schools. They'll play there, but they also will play club, and there's big clubs that get them ready. And everybody knows who the big players are, and they get recruited to go to the big colleges, right? And then you'll stay however many years they're going to stay. We're back. I think the NBA changed the rules this year where they're going to allow kids to jump straight from high school into the pros again, the way Kobe and Garnett did way back in the day. So it's a well-oiled machine over here. What's it like over there with you guys?
In Europe, there isn't really high school sports like that. They're like just fun teams at school. But if you want to do any sport, play any sport, you got to sign up at a club and pay for it first. There are, of course, academies too, where you have 2 practices a day instead of 1. And so you go basically from U10, under 10, till under 19. And after your 3rd year of under 19, you either enter the local league, we call it country league, or you enter the state league, the Bundesliga, Super League.
Okay.
So in Austria is just two leagues. So we have the local league, and then you have the second league and the first league. First league is already professional, but the payment isn't really that well. Austria is more of a country where you come here, play one season, and try to go somewhere else.
Travel somewhere else, get into a different league. I know there's all kinds of different leagues over there, countries and whatnot, right? Professionals. And then yeah, it's so interesting to really delve into that, because you almost barely know how it works over here. And then basketball, I think, has grown internationally way bigger than anything else. Like
Oh
football
yeah,
has been trying, right? The NFL does their game in Europe every week, and it's not taken off over there. Nobody really cares about football over there, American football. But basketball, when it went international, and when the NBA really started to climb, and they really started trying to expand the game into other countries, it took off. And I think for various reasons, similar to soccer, in my estimation, is soccer is even easier. You need a ball, and a ball can be anything from a rolled up wad of tape to whatever. It doesn't necessarily have to be a soccer ball. People will be very inventive. You go to a local park and put 2 trash cans up, you got a goal. And on one side, so soccer is easy to do. You could run around barefooted if you wanted to. You don't need any equipment, right? You just need an open space and 2 goals. And
played on the beach.
yeah. And then basketball is the same. You do need a couple hoops, but if you got one, you can play half court, right? So it's simple, and people love it, and it's competitive, and it's been great over here in the States because there's so many great basketball players from around the world, and the NBA will find them. If you're good there, you'll end up over here playing for millions of dollars. So it's interesting to hear that from the other end. So you started out in basketball, and then you tore your ACL. Now, you were telling me before we had a brief chance to talk that when you found out, not just posing lifting, for the girls at the beach, but that the lifting could enhance your skills, right? Make you quicker, make you faster. You could jump higher, which all of those things are obviously a boon in any athletic endeavor, but especially basketball. Once you found that out, you went whole hog, and this is where you caught my ear, especially because that first time I remember in 1986 was my senior year at UCLA, and plyometrics was just starting to become really popular. I don't remember. I think that was the first time I heard that term even. And I was a kinesiology major at UCLA, and I'm sure I have been doing what you would call plyometrics since I was in high school. We used to do hurdle bounds, and, we would do one-legged jumps up the stadium steps, repeats all the way to the top and stuff like that, which I would call plyometric at this point. So, we did those, but when I got to UCLA, we really went crazy with, boxes and, having people pull you on elastic bands towards something and then jump, and just, and like you, I went, it was my senior year, and I was lifting heavy, and I was doing the plyos, and I could feel the benefits, right? I could feel the spring. So that was my best year. I jumped 2.22 meters my senior year. And with about 3 weeks left to go in the season, all of a sudden, man, I got up one morning, and I swear, Dario, I felt like I was an 85-year-old man. Like my knees were aching bad, and my shins were starting to bug me. They hadn't bugged me since high school. And I was like, what is going on? And, it was like, I went to see the trainers, and they're just like, yeah, you look like you've got patellar tendonitis in both knees, like, what? I got what? It was like, and, looking back at it now with all the experience that you and I have in this area, is like, well, you overtrained. You told me that. You go, I just went whole hog, and you're having so much fun, and you're getting better and better and better. And it's like over here in the States when you're taking supplements or something, right? And you go, well, if a little bit is good, then a lot is better. So I'll just overload on it. And Man, I got to that place and it was at the worst time, right at the biggest meets, like you're saying, you're getting ready for a big game and all of a sudden you're out. And, you know, I had that same experience where it was like, man, I couldn't train. I had to back off on my training, which really messes with your brain because now you're thinking I'm going to be weaker and slower. And,
For sure.
so tell us a little bit about that. How did, once you had the leading up to the injury and then how you came back from it.
Well, so my whole rehab process started off really badly. First off, I had to wait 2 months for my surgery
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't, because here in Austria, you don't have to pay for surgeries and healthcare in general. But if you do, you have benefits. So I didn't pay for it because I didn't want to pay a couple $1,000 at the age of 17. I didn't have
Right.
that money. So I had to wait 2 months. Then, like 1 week before the surgery, I was getting ready for it mentally. I get a letter from the hospital saying, "Yeah, my doctor went on vacation, so I have to wait another 2 weeks."
Oh,
So then, in the middle of the summer, I get my surgery. I started rehab with a physio. 3 months later, I quit on my physio, and then what I did the day after I quit on my physio, I started reading high performance training for sports. So then I figured out, okay, if I wanna if I wanna get back, I need to get strong first. So then I went crazy on heavy lifting for about a year. Then after a year, I came about the concept that you can't be lifting heavy all the time. So then I completely took out the heavy lifting and I went plyometrics, only plyometrics for 4 to 6 weeks. That went well for 2 weeks or so. My athleticism increased, but that was mostly because fatigue subsided.
right.
So then my knee started bothering me again. I was like a pain on the inside of my knee. My knee would lock up. I couldn't extend it or flex it until I shake it back into place. So then that was about 1 year and 3 months after my surgery. And then I would move to Vienna. So I'm from Carinthia originally, and then I moved to Vienna to study sports science. Sports science, by the way, is like kinesiology, exercise science, all of it together.
Okay.
That's called here. So I moved there, and in Vienna there was a single gym, like in Austria in general, a single gym that did athletic performance, which was called RAVO, which stands for Research Athletes World. And the coach there, the founder of that, he offered to mentor me, and then I started working with him. I learned a ton from him in terms of periodization, exercise selection. He introduced me to critical thinking and all those important concepts that you have to wrap your head around as a young coach.
Mm-hmm.
And he started me off with a group of soccer players, and he just threw me right into the cold water.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I would figure it out by myself on the field, and yeah, that's how it's
Awesome.
journey.
So, wow, you mentioned a lot of stuff in a flyby there. So, the terms that jumped out to me when you talked about periodization. What now? My brain, when I hear that, I think, for instance, over here, I do a 12-week cycle, with the athletes where we'll go
Mm,
and, for 4 weeks, start off with the base program, right? They're lifting, they're doing all their stuff is kind of, would say on the spectrum of intensity would be lower, less weight, more reps. Like you were talking about the guy having you do 3 sets of 12 and 4 sets of 12, forever. And you got
yeah.
bored and you weren't feeling like you're going anywhere. So we're only going to stay in that for like 4 weeks, maybe, 5 sets of 8 on squats or, whatever, 4 sets of 10 of this or that. Right. And I would usually try to get my kids to be going full range of motion if we can, during that time. Now for a high jumper and a basketball player, like, I don't necessarily need, although basketball is a little different than high jumping, I don't need that leg to bend that far for the
Mm,
most part. Like high jumpers, when they come to put their foot on the ground, they really don't want to have the knee bent too deep because it's going to take too long to get off the ground, unless they're an incredible power jumper and they can just jump straight up in the air and do what they got to do. For the most part, the speed guys are going to come in and not bend that knee so much. So what I would have them do then, after 4 weeks of the base stuff, going full range of motion, is start to go maybe half squats, right? And doing, instead of power cleans from the floor, doing hang cleans, so you're not bending as much, right? And then go 4 weeks of that. And then, you get to where you're doing jump squats and quick, explosive, maybe even still heavier. And the sets are getting smaller the whole time, right? So I want to hear from you, because I know the vacuum that I'm operating in, because I think I took one class one time for my exercise science master's degree I got at Cal State Long Beach, and we talked about some of those concepts, but I never had really had anybody sit down and literally walk me through, one like what you're talking about. So when you're talking about periodization, what is it that you mean, as far as take for instance your soccer guys that you're going to train? What would you be doing with them? Like, how long would the program be, and how would you break it down?
Well, soccer is kind of a special deal here in Austria because they barely have off seasons at all. If they have an off season, it's 2 to maybe 4 weeks. So they don't really have off seasons like that. But I do have big off seasons with my basketball players.
Okay,
So
let's do basketball instead, because that actually does work better with with me. Like I said, I recruit them to high
yeah.
jump all the time. So yeah, go ahead.
So with basketball players, it depends on how far they get with their team in the season, but mostly preseason starts in mid-August, beginning of September, and season goes until around April, mid-May, and if they get really, really far, end of May.
Right.
So most of the times I have like 2 to 3 months with them every single off season. Mostly it's 12 to 14 weeks around that. And what I do with them is I basically do a triphasic program. Um, and I start with an aerobic phase, 2 to 3 weeks of just building aerobic endurance, building that base, increasing oxygen availability in the muscles, capillary density. So I do circuit training. I call them glute circles, where they basically get 40 exercises and they go 30 seconds on, 15 seconds off. And it's basically full body 3 times a week. And if they're advanced, I'd go 2 times a week of circle, a glute circle like that. And the other 2 days, I do 1 by 20. I don't know if you're familiar with 1 by 20.
No.
1 by 20 is basically you take a weight that you could barely do 20 good looking reps with, and you may take short rests in the sets, but you try to go 20 reps in one go. So it builds crazy amount of just work capacity and technique, especially with more novice athletes. So
Okay.
after my quick phase, I go straight into the classic eccentric, isometric, concentric phases that I got from Kel Dietz. So it's not complete block periodization where I just go just aerobic endurance and then just strength. It's undulating. So I always have my plyos present at just lower intensities and slightly lower volumes.
Right.
You could also call it a more vertical integration, where we always have every stimulus present. We're always training fast. That's the most important part. If I have an eccentric, isometric, and concentric phase going on with an athlete, it doesn't mean that 80% of their program is going to be heavy strength. It's just going to mean for me that the main lift is going to focus on either one of those qualities, but the rest of the program is still going to be fast, because I also don't want to be taken away from their sport practice, because they're training their skill all day, every day during the off season.
Right.
Basketball players especially, I can also structure their skills training. So I tell them how to set up their weeks, the high and the low days, and what to do on those days. So what I did this past off season with the basketball players was Monday vertical focus, Wednesday change of direction, and Friday sprinting.
Okay.
So So on Mondays, we did vertical focus. So it was some kind of squatting movement. Our plyometrics, our bounds and hops were more focused on going up for height. And in the evening, in the skill practice, which I also designed for them, we would do focus on finishing, getting to the basket and jumping, just a lot of jumping with contact, without contact, from further out, and so on. All, of course, in a live setting. So on Wednesdays, we would focus on change of direction, which offered the opportunity to work on lateral capabilities of the athlete and also horizontal force production. So I think producing force horizontally, especially loading horizontally, is kind of underused in strength training. So we did change of direction work, agility work on Wednesdays, and then in the evening it would be creating shots. So different one-on-one situations, just creating a shot with constraints, of course. So you can't go to the basket, just creating a shot. On Fridays, we would do sprinting, all-out sprinting, and situational live play in the evening. So I'll make sure that training stays fast, even in the strength phases, and that it works together with the skills training.
Right.
So after the eccentric, isometric, concentric phases, I go into a power phase, power transition phase, if you want, which won't go too long for most athletes because I don't see the middle ground, the in-between power zones, to matter as much. I think the poles are more important. So really going really heavy, increasing that force output and increasing that speed output. So speed. So in the power phases, we would just change up the lifts. So for example, I would turn a heavy squat, into a more lightly loaded squat, where I tell the athlete, get as many reps as possible in 4 seconds. So they start pulling themselves down and up, and that increases intense. So they can go against the clock or against each other. So who can get more reps in this time? Who can complete 4 reps first? And then I would move into probably the most fun phase to me, the speed phase. So this is where we go all out on plyometrics, maximum velocity sprinting, and where it all comes together just before they enter their preseasons.
Okay. Wow. So I find that really interesting. Okay, so you're on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday there. On the days in between, what do they do? I know they're still going to be playing their basketball, but do they not see you, or they just do recovery day stuff, or what do they do?
With some athletes, I'm gonna have them do upper body work. Some athletes are just not are that advanced that they don't really need upper body work as much anymore. Where we would do it just on a Saturday, but those in between days, so Thursday and Saturday mostly off. Those would be my low days. So I would either have them do some upper body and core work and mobility work, and that would be working together with the skills training, where we just do shooting. So it's 1 versus 0, no live gameplay, just shooting, keep it low intensity so they can be ready for that next high intensity day.
Okay. So I heard a lot of interesting stuff there. The force production, speed, lateral. When you got to lateral, that was one thing I was this has been about a 3-year little exodus for me away from traditional, training. Everything that I was doing for the high jump was basically vertical, right? So I'm trying to change direction quickly, go up, and it came to my mind. For years I've been teaching guys how to use their arms to get off the ground, and then how to use their knee drive, to get up into the air, and then what to do while in the air with those body parts, because they can't just be waving around. You see guys pop their hands back to their hips or reach for their foot, or and they're trying to arch their backs and do all that stuff. And I remember thinking, for years I've been looking at 3 limbs, and I haven't been looking at the takeoff leg, because the takeoff leg has a simple job in a lot of ways. It's like, get on the ground fast and then push as hard as you can straight up explosively. And there's not a ton of technique involved in that, as far as what direction, or you jump off that leg. So it's like, and then I realized, I go, well, we're running at the bar in a pretty high velocity and making an angled turn. Like if you were going to come in and do a reverse layup, right, in
Yeah.
basketball, one of the first dunks I learned how to do was a reverse dunk because it was easier for me as a high jumper. I was just like, oh,
Yeah.
I'll just run up like this and do what I do in the high jump, right? So,
Yes.
but you're carrying that speed up towards the bar, and then I realized there's a component of your speed that's going towards the basket, and there's a component that's going this way. And I realized that a lot of jumpers struggle as they carry that speed because they'll wash towards the bar, right? So if I'm leaning this way and I'm going to come up and jump, I'm running this direction, and all those forces are going to just slingshot me that way. So I was thinking, I'm training this leg to jump straight up, and I'm losing that battle up at the
Mhm.
top towards the bar. So I'm like, first of all, I need to get really good core strength so that I'm not wobbly this way, more oblique work, right? So
Mhm.
side to side. And I also need to strengthen my back so that I can lean away and back from the bar. So I've got to have strong glutes and low back, erector spinae, all that stuff. I'm like, okay, that's good, but what about the angle of the takeoff? And so what you're talking about, this lateral side to side, I was looking at that going, okay, I get that. And if I'm planning on my right foot and jumping to my left, and I'm planning my left foot and jumping to my right, that's quickness side to side. And you can see basketball, soccer, volleyball, even tennis. I got to change direction quickly and go get something and hit it or
Yeah.
move or play defense, right? Lateral is huge. NFL as a cornerback or any player on defense, and the offensive guys change direction quickly.
Mhm.
So I get that. And I was thinking, well, mine's the exact opposite in some ways because I'm going to plant my left foot over here and try to jump to the right, like way back against the grain, and that's when I started looking at both backward plyos because I've seen people jump down off of a box and jump backwards up onto the box. And I remember thinking, that is not without application to what I'm doing. Now,
Mhm.
I'm never going to be able to have them at the speed that they're moving plant that foot and jump backwards. That's not going to happen because there's too much momentum.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm thinking if I'm training that, it might resist better. You know what I mean? Like it might fight the direction change better. And that same thing with, I've had my guys doing bounding where they'll go basically drive this knee up and across and hit, and then drive this one up and across, go the other way, and like
Yeah.
this, right? And
Cross.
I haven't seen a lot of that. I've seen a little bit of it, but I'm like, I know I'm not a pioneer, but I'm like in that area. I'm like, I find that really it's got to be beneficial to train someone to lean all the way in the other direction and then be able to push,
Yeah.
back. So we've started doing some of that. But yeah, when I heard that, and then the eccentric, concentric, and isometric, this is the first time I've talked about those since I talked with Aaron Washa in the very first Raise the Bar podcast. And he was telling me how important isometrics were. And I told him at that time, which this is now over a year and a half ago, that I had not been trained that way. Over here in the US, they told me when I was a freshman at UCLA and I started taking my basic stuff inside kinesiology, they said isometrics has no place in athletic training. That was back in 1982. So, things have come a long way since then because I know there's a lot of stuff that you guys do with isometrics. So everything, a lot of the things that I learned, I've had to actually unlearn. So I'm kind of envious of you guys, this new, what I'm calling the new school. Now, when you did all this, Dario, did you sound self-taught, and do you have any degrees? Did you get any certifications or anything, or is this just kind of you're learning on the go and going with it?
Actually, like, so I already mentioned my mentor.
Mm-hmm.
Put me under his wing. I learned a heck ton from him, and I learned from all of his mistakes that he did in 15 years in the industry, which was probably the best thing that could ever happen to me because is getting a mentor is like the biggest shortcut that you could ever take.
Sure.
Um, and apart from that, I just read a lot of books. I read studies. I listen to tons of podcasts. I think podcasts are honestly one of the best ways to learn, period, because you can you can listen to people with years and years of experience talk about what they're good at. So, and apart from that, I'm in university right now. I just entered my 5th semester, so my 3rd year. Um, and apart from that, I don't have any certifications. I just did the internship at Ravo, which I mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
That's awesome. So, that when you're finished with your semesters there, you said you're on your 5th one. How many do you have to do, and what is the result of that going to be for you?
So the Bachelor of Science, you can do it in 6 semesters, so in 3 years, but it's gonna take me 4 because I'm already coaching a lot.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and I rather spend my time reading books that actually matter for my job,
Right.
rather than study for university, because I would say 75% of what I learn at university is kind of useless. And
Right.
and like and here in Austria, here in Austria, thing is with sports science, it's like sports science is a major that you kind of made for athletes. So
Mhm.
if you're a kind of a middle ground athlete who's on the edge of going pro, and or like pro but can't fully live off of it, you go study sports science on the side.
Okay.
So that's what it is here. And the whole curriculum is more structured towards not developing coaches or trainers, but rather for um, getting people ready to take some position in a sports club or sports management type of position.
Okay. Yeah, it's so that I remember talking with I had a high jumper on a few months back. I think Rosie talked about that, and then also Abraham Vogelsang was a decathlete from Norway, and I think he was explaining things kind of the way you did, talking about the way the clubs worked. That was like there's, like you said, no college, right? No high school. The college is different, so there's like the local clubs, and then when you get good at there's ways to step up. I think he was the under 20, decathlete, champion in Norway, or in the Scandinavian countries, and is continuing to move up the ladder from there. But it's all set up so differently. Over here it's definitely pre-high school, then high school, college, pro, and then for some of the sports, other than the major ones, the football, basketball, baseball, hockey, even soccer to its extent, they can go through that same cycle over here, clubs all the way through high school, and then college and pro. And depending on how good they are, they might skip right through the college in a year or two, or none, depending on what it is. Football, they have to play 2 years. They don't let them come out early.
Yeah.
Basketball, now they're going right away, right? And then I don't know how it works in soccer. I think you can skip. I want to say you can skip it even here in the States if you were good enough to go right to the national team, but I'm not sure. I haven't followed soccer as much, but all right. So, wow, I have 80 million questions. When when you're doing your stuff, this is just from a practical standpoint. I heard you say that the stuff about an aerobic phase where lots of reps, right? Lots of reps, full motion. Your circuit training, 30 seconds on, 15 seconds off, or whatever it is. I'm sure you can play with that. I know that you can do whatever you want with those parameters. And they're sweating like pigs, and they're my mind right away went to, okay, if we're going that many reps, aren't they going to slow down, and isn't that going to be detrimental to speed? And
Mhm.
then I know you don't stay there that long, right? That was the base training you were talking about, and then you
Yeah.
move on into something else. So I was thinking about that, and then I also was thinking about when you mentioned power. I remember just recently talking to some of my athletes. I said, I kind of forget my training sometimes. I'm like, because in high jumping, they talk about power versus speed. Okay. You say, okay, power jumpers are slower, and they gather their arms and they just blam, they just blast off. It's kind of like, Hulk smash, like the stronger Hulk gets, the faster and higher Hulk jumps, and it's like, and then some guys are just taller and lighter and faster, and they just, and they're off the ground and boom. And those are the guys, if you were playing basketball with them, you might not be able to jump up off 2 feet and do anything, because they really change their speed into lift, and they got to have some room to do that. Where the power guy might just grab the ball and jump up and tomahawk it,
Yeah.
one step, no steps. I tell this story to my kids sometimes. Mike Izzy, if you're out there, he was a javelin thrower at UCLA when I was a freshman, and we were on the basketball court, and talking really, and then a ball comes rolling down and bumps into Mike's feet, and we're standing there talking. He reaches down, picks it up, and then just jumped, from the ground straight up and tomahawk just like this and I'm standing there watching him, and I'm like, okay, first of all, I'm the high jumper, like if anybody was gonna do that, I expect it to be me. And secondly, he was like 230. I mean, he was a big dude, he was a javelin thrower. He's like powerful upper body and all that. And I go, dude, how can you do that? And he goes, hey, I do power cleans with 385, I do squats with this. He starts giving me these numbers, and I'm just like, what? And I'm like, look at that, just, power, just literally. I mean, he squatted down deep knee bend, like we're talking about, wasn't a quick explosive load. It was just a power. And so, I started getting my introduction into power, speed, how do you train for that, all that. And I keep forgetting power is force times velocity, correct? Mm-hmm. So power is both. I mean, in a way, if you go, somebody's more powerful, they should be both stronger and moving faster, right?
Right.
And I can train. I'd like to increase both of those. I'd like to get them to be more powerful and be able to move faster, right? So I started thinking of that in the way that my brain has been thinking about power versus speed forever. And as far as a high jumper is concerned, and I remember thinking, well, wait, power and these are both kind of related and on the same spectrum. We got to find out how to maximize these, right? So, and then with that, here's my next question. I'm sorry, my brain.
No, it's all right. It's all right.
My brain sorts things in weird ways. So when we're talking about power, and my mind, I put in my power concepts, I put, okay, squats, lunges, step ups, hang cleans, snatch, push press, anything that's explosive using both legs, is there anything I missed on that? I like to do forward and back lunges. I like tons of step up work on single leg, so most of those I just listed were 2 legs, except for the lunges and the step ups, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, deadlifts. Now I'm not a big deadlift guy. At UCLA, we didn't do deadlifts, but I understand them. I have done them, and I see them as almost like a squat variant, basically, right? I mean, it's not that much different.
Yeah.
It's a way of doing a squat where you don't have to put the weight on your back and, balance and do all that stuff and put that weight on your spine, where you can just grab down with your arms this way. In some ways, it would seem like, maybe I should have done that more, and my back would bug me less. But you got the 2-legged and the single-legged power lifts. That's what I think of as power. So forgive me if it doesn't match up with your definitions. But then I would go, okay, those are my power lifts. And my first question is, I know inherently I can't do all of those, or should I be doing all of those? Like when you do your power, do you pick one of those and kill them on it? Or do you, put in a mix of those? How does that work with you in your training?
So in my training, when I started out, I used to be a big, let's train for, if we want to be powerful, let's train for power. But as I have learned more and tried out a few different things and saw the results from those, I came to the conclusion, also talking to other coaches about it and having discussions, is if we look at power, the way it's defined in biomechanics, force times velocity, or work divided by time. It's just a physics measurement, really. So it's nothing substantial, real that you can harness. So basically, if we want to be powerful, we have to be strong and fast, as you have said. But doing an exercise that displays power, that just because just because we produce peak power, so to speak, measurable peak power, doesn't mean we're getting the most powerful that we can be.
Right.
So basically I've come to really just working the pulse. So max force and max speed, and the power, you will put everything together by yourself just by doing plyometrics and training your skill, jumping high, or playing your sport. So for my power work, if I'm gonna use power work, so using around 30 to 70% of 1 RM, it's really just gonna be to potentiate an athlete for either a training session, a sports session that is coming up the same day or the day after. So before a game day, I call them game prep lifts. So we're just gonna come in, do maybe 2 sets of 2 of a banded trap bar deadlift together with some plyometric, just to get the nervous system firing and get them ready for the next day. So if I want to develop a powerful guy, I'm gonna make him lift heavy, and I'm gonna do him tons of plyos. And adding to maybe just let me ask you, are you a speed jumper?
I was more of a power guy, but I'm right now, when I'm looking internationally at most of the jumpers, both men and women, I see a preponderance of speed, what I would call someone running really fast and changing it into lift, as
And
opposed to
narrow
people
hips,
that,
right?
yeah,
Narrow hip, narrow
yes,
shoulder.
tall, thin, a lot of single armers. They run up and this arm goes up. And so they're generating force with the backside arm and the drive knee only. This arm just makes them taller, and
Yeah.
some of them are already 6'5". And so when they get this arm up here, they're even like 7 feet tall. Their center mass is way higher, right? So yeah.
Yeah. So talking about the compound lifts. So for every athlete, the way I start training athletes is I don't really have a formal assessment the way it's taught in schools or in certifications or like anything like that. I basically start an athlete training, and from the first training session, I see where they at. So let's say this is the whole progression timeline of an athlete. So if I get an athlete and he's here, he's going to be doing these type of lifts. If he's here, he's going to be doing the easier lifts. So a goblet squat. So you might, if he's a super novice, start off with a goblet squat, a hand supported single leg RDL with a dumbbell.
Right.
And if more advanced, we're going to move to more advanced versions. And depending on their body structure, this is how I individualize the most. I'm going to select their exercises. So I'm not going to deadlift any narrow, thin, springy guy, because they just don't have the space in their pelvis to hinge back that far. So
Okay.
if you have a super springy, narrow guy, so like narrow rib cage and an even narrower pelvis, and you're gonna make him do deadlifts, you're just gonna compress the heck out of his lower back, and that's when the low back issues might start turning up.
Right. Okay.
So like narrow, springy guys, I always have them squat, front loaded with their heels elevated. Not always, of course. There's times where we want to compress them a little bit more. So like get a good load on the bar just to drive some systemic, just to make the organism really experience a lot of force in a way that they could in any other setting. So a back squat will be better to get someone to really experience a lot of force on their system.
Well, you can do more with the back squat just because of the loading, right? If you got it behind your neck as opposed to in front, because it's harder to balance, right? So back squats can be easier. Now that the foot elevation thing is another one. For a long time, I remember even when I was a Bruin at UCLA, we weren't elevating the feet. Like lots of times it's come down and make sure your feet are flat. And now I'm seeing a preponderance of work with the slant boards, put your heels up on whatever. And,
Exactly.
it's funny for me because my calves from the time I was a kid, my gastrocs and my, soleus muscles, for whatever reason, were always just badass. Like I've got really good calves for whatever reason. And my mom used to, when I was a kid, she used to stand me in the corner when I was being bad. And I remember she came over one time and she goes, "Why are you standing on your toes?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" She goes, "You're standing on your toes." So I was like standing way up on my toes in the corner, and I think that's where my calves started or whatever when I was like 5. But I remember it was difficult for me to go flat footed. Like,
Mhm.
they were saying stay on with your heels on the ground. And I was like, I can't even balance doing that. I felt awkward. And
Yeah.
now it's like, no, you could be with your heels way up here, or, even without them, I don't even think I need a slant board. I would just get up on my toes and drop down and do that. So
Mhm.
what is I guess, like I said, I got a million questions. We got to be careful because we'd be sitting here for 3 hours. I get in trouble. You get in trouble. Um, I get in trouble with my wife. Okay. The
Girlfriend.
Is there, yeah, right. What are you doing? You talking to some guy in America? What for? What is the deal with just really quickly as a side, now that we're on this side tangent, what is the difference between the heels elevated and flat when it comes to power and how it's affecting training? What is the importance of that?
So basically, before we want to talk about that, we gotta classify what is a squat and what is a hinge.
Okay.
So a squat is a hinge. Let's start with that. A hinge is the pelvis moving back in space horizontally.
Okay.
If we want to, and then we have the squat, which is the opposite. It's the pelvis moving just vertically in space.
Right.
So the problem with a lot of people squatting is that they do squats flat-footed. Even if they front load, they can't get their pelvis to just move vertically. This is how we get the quote unquote perfect squatty pattern.
Okay.
So athletic performance, if we want to minimize the negative drawbacks or the shape changes that come from really, really heavy squatting or having compensations within your lifts, is that we want to make the lift as true to the lift as possible. So if I want to squat someone, I want to make it squatty. If I want to hinge someone, I want to make it hingy. So if I want to make so like there's a like from all the athletes I ever trained, there's probably like I don't know 3 or so that could do a flat-footed vertical squat. So it's really just a small percentage of the population that can do a perfect vertical squatty squat with
Right.
feet. So if we elevate the heels, we can take that ankle mobility out of the equation, and we can allow them to just drop their pelvis straight down, which will
Right.
make squat squatty because they can also keep an upright torso, like it is in jumping, for example.
Right. Right.
So, but on the flip side of that, if someone has problems hinging, which is sometimes the case with narrow bouncy guys, like you can see them in high jump for especially, they will have we can do the opposite. So we can elevate their forefoot in order to put their hip into more internal rotation to start with, so they can have have an easier time sitting their pelvis back in space.
Okay. So you'd actually elevate their toes and drop their heels down as they're doing a lift?
I just put the slant board or like a little squat block. I just put them under the forefoot.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's interesting. So now I get the squatty movement, and you're saying to go straight up and down. What about the hinge? I'm not clear on the hinge. What is a hinging type exercise, and why do they need to be doing a hinge as opposed to a squatty move?
So a squatty move is inherently going to be more knee dominant, so it's going to load the quads more. If you
Okay.
want to load the posterior chain, we're going to want to do hinging movements, so hinges. So for a hinge, the most important thing is that and for also for a squat, is that we get the hips to extend before the knees. So we want to delay knee extension. That is going to take off. That is, first of all, going to optimize the kinetic chain and the sequence of the kinetic chain to transfer forces from the hips to the knees to the ankles into the ground. And what it's also going to do, especially that is the case with many basketball players, who have this issue that their knees extend too early in the gait cycle. So in sprinting and jumping, and just walking for that sake, they have knee problems because their knee extends too early. It does too much work in comparison to their hip, and that's when the patella tendonitis starts to pop up.
Okay. So what is I'm hearing it, but I'm not getting a visual. So the squatty movement, if you have me doing a squat this way and I'm up on my heels, right? I'm coming up and down this way.
Yeah.
If I'm the back squat, hands behind here, I'm up on my toes. You can't see them down here. Then when this posterior chain, I had this described to me by a sports physical therapist here too, and it's the newer terminology. I'm terrible at it, so I don't understand posterior chain. And then when you're talking about the hips moving before the knees, I'm like, this super fascinating. So I just want to make sure I understand it. So what kind of a lift would we be doing? Is it still a squat just done a different way, or is it a completely different kind of exercise?
Sorry, I forgot to answer that question. So for posterior chain, we can do deadlifts, which are going to be more hip dominant, hip deadlifts, Romanian deadlifts, hip thrusts. We can do glute ham raises.
What I would call a glute push, like when you're laying on your back and you're thrusting your hips up with your feet locked on the ground, right? You've got to like
exactly. That's a hip thrust. That's a hip thrust.
Yeah. So
that work glutes especially, and like deadlifts and RDLs are gonna work also the glutes, but also the hamstrings especially.
Right. I call those, for me, some of those I'm calling posterior auxiliary work. Like, but I understand they can be, they're super powerful moves also. This is helping me resort. Okay.
So for me,
like you said, the hips are moving that way. And like you said, if I'm doing that correctly, I'm not really moving much at the knees, a little, but the movement is hips because I'm trying to move my hips to get my hips higher, right? So that's when I have a guy on their back, I call that pit work, but we'll lay horizontally and I'll have them push their hips up, sometimes I have them laying flat and I'll have them try to push their hips up, which you get very little movement, but you can, get a little erector spinae or whatever. And then I'll have them bring their feet in to where their knees are and their hips come up. And I say, bring your feet all the way next to your butt. And their hips go way up, right? They're pushed through there. And we'll do that with 2 legs and 1 leg. And then, I can do the other stuff like you're talking about with the barbell or dumbbells, a medicine ball, whatever kind of resistance, a band, have them push their hips up. So that is working posterior chain. Is that what you're calling? And that the definition of posterior chain is what exactly?
Glutes. So also, of course, the back. So you're always going to work the whole system. You apply load to the body if you do the exercises the correct way. But if you're talking posterior chain, it's basically the glutes. For the lower body, it's the glutes, the hamstrings, and the calves. So I set up my training week is I will most of the times have a knee. So for the main lift, I will have a knee dominant day and a hip dominant day. So for the knee dominant day, I'm going to use the squatting movement as the main lift. And for the hip dominant day, I'm either going to use a deadlift or some type of single leg hinge variation. And I'm gonna load it really, really heavy. I don't have auxiliary work like that. I go big on split squats. I go big on single leg hinges, single leg RDLs, and I go big on hip thrusts if I'm gonna use
Okay. Just as a curiosity, I mentioned to you before, I have a thing and this is not trained and this is me. I'm, like I said, and we've been talking for close to an hour now. And if you're still with us, this is Raise the Bar with Troy Haynes. This is my guest, Dario Saisan from Vienna. And we're talking about sports training and, explosive sports training where Dario's working with basketball players. And I'm assuming you do get some soccer, basketball.
Yeah. soccer, basketball, volleyball. I also had an MMA fighter once, and also a model, like a female model.
Right.
Yeah.
How about any tennis, anything like that?
No, no
No
tennis,
tennis
no.
players. Tennis is a slow to adjust sport, but yeah, I've been seeing there are some that are starting to see the value of the agility stuff. That's a sport where they just want to go hit the ball for 3 hours straight, right? So it's hard to train them after that. They're gonna be tired. But um, okay, so anyway, getting back to where we're going, I was, you know, all this stuff that I'm doing, and especially here on Raise the Bar, is the peek behind the curtain. So and Barbara Bachaka, who is my strong right hand, who helps me do a lot of stuff with Instagram and dealing with the microcosm of things that I don't understand on the internet. we're we're going through, and she calls people that don't show what they do on their feeds, or doesn't reveal what they do in their training. She calls them gatekeepers. So, people that I'm always the one trying to look behind the curtain. I'm like, okay, this one girl I posted on my site the other day, she's 15 or 16 years old now, a tall, leggy, girl from Poland. She jumped 5'9 1/4, like a 176 at 16, which over here would have just destroyed the state meet, and she would have won it as a sophomore probably at 15 or 16 over here, having 2 more years to jump, right? And I'm
Yeah.
watching that going, okay, how in the world can this little, thing jump that high? And I'm watching her technique, which is outrageously good. But I'm like, I understand the technique part. I can train all of that. I'm like, she's got to be doing something else, right? And I'm just like, there's nothing else on her feed. And I'm not calling her a gatekeeper, but I'm saying, when I look at these coaches, some people are very open, and here's what we're doing. And a lot of people are like, nope, I've got my little secret, and you're never going to find out. I'm not writing it down in any book anywhere. And it's just going to be the people that come to train with me. And so, I'm like, I'm that guy that's like, I want to look behind the curtain. I want to know what it is that you're doing that's, creating success. So, a lot of my stuff has been, like you're saying, it's trial and error, because there's no textbook over here on how to take someone, say young, and the textbook over here also says you can't start lifting weights with young kids until they're, what, 14 or 15, right? So here in the States, traditionally they don't lift all the way through middle school. So when they get into high school as a ninth grader, when they're 14, then they can start getting in the weight room, right? So we've got all these things going, and then like, okay, how am I going to train them to get to the level where they can do the really high explosive stuff? Because I think sometimes some people go power too early. They're not ready for it, and they'll get hurt. They're not really in the kind of shape where they can do heavy plyometrics, the heavy power. They're not ready for it yet. So we're going along that line, and then you and I were talking. I said, well, I want to do full range of motion. I'd like to do the power work, which I was calling power cleans, step ups, squats, lunges, deadlifts. We put all those in there, snatch, right? And now you're making me think. I'm going to go back and go, okay, which ones of these are these all knee dominant? Like every one of those that I listed, are those pretty much knee dominant?
Step
Squats,
ups,
lunges, step ups, step ups.
step up, big hip dominance. So there's a study that showed, like it was a hypertrophy study that showed that step ups are one of the best exercises at activating the glutes. So step ups, hip dominant. A lunge or a split squat, depending on how you do it, can either be knee or hip dominant.
Right. With depending on the length of the step, right? If it's a short step, you get your knee way out in front, and if it's a long step, your knee's
Upright
behind.
torso.
Yeah.
Upright torso, short step, knee over the toe. It's more knee dominant.
Right.
It's not completely knee dominant. It's always a spectrum. You're always also using your hip.
Right.
If you're gonna have a long step, lean forward, knee over the ankle, it's gonna be more hip dominant. RDLs, lifts, all hip dominant. And then any squatting movement is gonna be knee dominance.
Okay. So, going back through that, this is great because I'm taking notes and I can go back and watch this anytime, but I'm going through and going, okay, then, so there's the range of motion deal. I was always taught full range of motion is better, right? If you can, you want to train the whole fiber throughout the length of motion. So a full squat all the way down, all the way up. But when we started doing squats, you say they're like, well, you want to make sure you wrap your knees and you want to be careful about going full range of motion a lot because you can do knee damage, right? You can pull that patellar tendon or the patella back into the knee and blah, blah, blah. And then now I'm looking at the knees over toes guy and he's like, you need to go all the way down, So it's like, you've got both sides of that argument. And I've had people almost yelling at me from both sides, So I'm like, okay. But as far as from what I understand, full range of motion to me means the longer the stretch I get on the muscle, when I can train all of the fibers all the way through the range of motion, that's going to increase power and speed, right? They should be able to get them, depending on how I'm moving now. I know we got to throw that in there. If I'm moving slowly through the full range of motion, maybe I don't produce more speed, but I will strengthen the fibers throughout the full range, right? And then ideally, but again, if we're doing it fast at the end, okay. So I was taught full range first during the base, half squats, say half range to the middle and getting heavier. And then like those quarter jump squats. Like I remember Javier Sotomayor, the world record holder in the high jump, came right after he broke the record over here to the States and jumped in a meet. And I got to jump against him at UCLA. It was great. And he jumped out of this world. He jumped 7'8" and was over it by like 6 inches. Some of the most amazing jumps I've ever seen. And he was training there during the week. And I had some of the guys said they'd seen him train, and he said he was doing repeat jump squats with like 500 pounds, and I'm going, those had to be super quick, like quarter jump squats, right? Like boom, 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 boom. But I'm picturing 500 pounds on my back trying to do quarter squats. I'm like, okay, he's really, really strong, obviously. So, my brain has since lumped that into full range, lighter weights, because you can't go, you got to be really, really strong to take 500 pounds and go all the way down there and all the way back up, right? So you go full range, half range, quarter range, from light to heavy, and the sets change, right? The volumes from high to low. That's the way my brain's been sorting for a long time. So when I start hearing this stuff, just recently I started adding in the lateral stuff we were talking about, the plyos, and then I was like, I've seen a move. I'm really interested to hear what you have to say on this. A move towards single leg stuff, like single leg squats. I've been seeing a lot of pistol squats. Been seeing the knees over toes guy, with those things where you're standing up on 3 plates, and dropping down this way to the front, and then I've seen people go on a box and drop way down below, right? Come back up on a single leg. And I've seen single leg now. I've seen single leg cleans. I've seen single leg deadlifts, right? And so just jumping ahead, what is the importance of that? And for my mind, I think sport specificity, right? Because in basketball, you can jump off 2 legs and dunk. And in volleyball, it's a requirement. But in track and field, very little work is done with both legs at the same time, right? So from a sport specificity viewpoint, I'm thinking I need to graduate towards more and more single leg stuff as I'm getting closer to competition.
So the way I see it, so I'm going to tackle those single leg versus double leg and full range versus partial range. So let me talk about the unilateral versus bilateral first.
Okay.
So bilateral work also transfers to single leg movements. So it's really just about the organism and the forces that you're exposed it to.
Right.
So that's the first point. And the second point is, if you look at a single leg versus a double leg squat. So if you do a single leg movement, let's say you can move 100 kilos on a double leg squat. but you can move probably around 70 or 75 kilos on a single leg squat. So that's because you're just using one leg, but you're still using the same upper body, the same back, the same erector spinae.
Right, right.
So if we look at a single leg versus a double leg squat, in relation, if you load both of them up to 90% of your one rep max, the single leg squat is gonna be more forceful, because in relation to the double leg squat, you're moving more weight on one leg.
On that particular leg, yeah, because you're sharing the load on the double leg, right? And then single leg. Okay, so you can do more. Good to know.
So the way my training is designed is I have around 70-75% single leg work, because of said reasons. And I'm gonna go double leg if I'm looking for outputs. So, and it's the same thing with plyos. So literally 80% of my plyos are unilateral, because you're moving on one leg basically all the time in sports. The only time I'm going to do two legs is if I'm jumping off two legs, or if I'm standing there before I'm going to move. So double leg work is really, in my eyes, a way to get maximum outputs. So it's depth jumps from a box is a maximum output. It's really like Joel Smith calls them, that nitroglycerin, nitro oxide. So you can really supercharge the body with double leg work, and it's the same for double leg squats. In the whole off season, I've moved from single leg work to double leg work. So my strength phases, the eccentric, isometric, concentric, are mostly single leg. It's only at the end of the concentric phase where I start to really involve some heavy bilateral squats, where I'm really looking for outputs and really pushing the envelope with that maximum force output. And it's really close to the season where I start doing some bilateral plyos, so I can really get the whole system going and get maximum power outputs. Really, way that you couldn't replicate it in a sport. You're never gonna get in basketball. Most of your actions are sub-maximal. They're really very a small number of really true maximal jumps, and you're always out of breath. So no jump is truly going to be maximal like that.
Right.
So bilateral work is really getting that pure power or pure power output, really. So that's for single leg versus double leg in my eyes, and full range versus partial range. I think both have their place. Both just have both are just tools. So if we're looking for maximum strength, we're looking for high muscular tension and really high rates of neural firing. So high rates of neural firing, we're going to get in both types of work, in partial and in full range. But the high muscular tension, we're going to get it at long muscle lengths. So if we have a high load on ourselves at a really long muscle length, we're going to get the most muscular tension we can get in a squat, for example.
Right.
And there have been studies. So they looked at partial versus full range, and the full range squats did a good job at increasing strength in all ranges of motion, even the top ranges of motion. But partial squats, they only produced improvements in the ranges that were trained. So training partial range is going to overload the top ranges of motion more than training full range. But if the purpose of strength training is getting generally stronger, then we're going to use full range. So if I want to get someone stronger, I'm going to use full range squats, full range RDLs, full range split squats with them.
Yeah.
And as you said, when you move to a more specific preparation periods closer to competition, or you want to prime someone for so they're a power jumper and they do really well if they squat a lot, or like they just feel they get a good general feeling from heavy lifts. And I'm going to use a partial lift just to get that nervous system and hormonal response with them right before the competition, because they like it and that's what their body likes.
Right. Oh, that's another fascinating area for me too, is the uh the day before the meet, the day before the meet, the day of the meet. Can you lift the
And
day of the
rest.
meet? Can you lift a little bit? I remember even back in 1986, one of my coaches was talking about, let's do some squats, but we'll go light and we'll go fast and we'll be done, but mostly to get that neuromuscular firing like you're talking about, and then
So
go.
tone ready for the
Yeah.
company.
Yeah. And that's a great topic. We're gonna have to do that another time.
Sure.
Then the full range, um, I like that discussion there. Full range is important. Obviously, you're getting the full stretch of the muscle. Then the short range, like you're saying, as a primer, and I can do a lot of the short range of movement. The advantage there is I can do more weight because I'm not going to go very far, right? I'm going to do a quarter jump squat is not really that deep. And the idea there is it is very sport specific in the high jump if my goal is to get on and off that leg quickly. So I don't want to have the knee bend a lot. It's going to flex. If I put my foot out on the ground and it looks the way some people do at takeoff is they're leaning back like this, from their heel strike all the way up through their body is a straight line. And
Yep.
foot looks like it's locked at the knee when it hits. But as I'm coming forward, I'm just stepping through. So it
Yep.
does bend and then come up off of there, but the range of motion through there from a zero at leg, knee lock to bend and then extend back to zero. We'd
Mm-hmm.
like that in my thought process to be as limited as possible, or I don't know if you've seen any of the biomechanical analysis where they'll show a guy throw a stick at the ground for the high jump and it hits and the stick is straight. So it hits and it bounces and it goes up and it starts to rotate just like the high jumpers do. I mean,
Okay.
literally.
I haven't seen that, but that sounds
But
interesting.
it is interesting, and a lot of people use that to say, well, you don't really need to use your hips or anything. You just need to hit this right takeoff angle and you'll flip around. I'm like, well, there's a lot of problems with that analogy for me because the stick doesn't have joints that wobble, So first of all, our stick is not a perfect biomechanical stick. Secondly, once I'm off the ground, I don't want to stay long because I'm going to spin slower. If I can shorten the body in the air, the way they bring their arms back and they bend their knees up and they throw their heads back and they get into that arch position, which you can see behind me on the raise the bar thing, that will spin quicker, right? Once they're in the air. So it's like, but as far as getting off the ground and maximizing your vertical, force and your center mass being as high as possible, and that quickness of changing the direction to the boom, like everybody talks about, it's like 1, 2, 3, boom, 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 boom. I'm going to get off the ground quick. I don't want to go bump, 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 that long, low lamb. When I do that, that's again the difference between a power and a speed. Somebody who's more powerful might stick that leg out there and generate a lot of force and change direction and then come up out of it because they can do it. They're strong enough. Whereas a speed guy, like you're saying, if you take a skinny guy down there and their leg goes down there, they're not going to come out. They can't generate that kind of force. So I'm thinking of that as a sport specific kind of thing towards the end as a finisher. Wow, Dario, you've overloaded my brain. I think it's going to explode.
I hope you took some notes.
No, absolutely, dude. This is the kind of stuff that just, because I'm one of those guys. Number one, I'm willing to experiment. Number two, I'm willing to be taught. And number three, I'm just like, I've always learned this way for whatever reason, from the beginning, from having coaches that you trust where you're just like, oh, what's the workout today? And they do the thinking, right? They go, we're going to do this and this and this and this. That's great. And you go along and you do that. And when you have good results, you're like, boom. And then sometimes I've gone through periods where I didn't have a coach. So now I'm like, okay, I'm training myself. What should I do? It's like, I remember what I was taught. And then sometimes I didn't always agree with what we were doing, but I did it. And so I'm a tinkerer, right? I start tinkering with things. And, the lab is out there on the track and, you can see the results and how they look as they're going up into the air. And then, you get the test back, and the test is competitions, how did they do? And, you can see the results lots of times, all right. Well, the first thing I was thinking too is I gotta travel to Vienna to come see you at work. And secondly, we got to do this again, man. There's so many things that I want to talk about. I keep bringing up on here on Raise the Bar that not only are we looking at coaches, athletes, trainers like Dario here, that are pushing the envelope in what they're doing, having success in many different ventures and sports and levels. Also, I want to, branch out into nutrition, how nutrition affects, what you're talking about. Do you guys, get into that with your athletes? Would be willing to assume that you are, because if they're training at these high levels, then they have to be eating, well, right? Correctly. Yeah. So I'm sure, and that's a huge area over here. I told this story to someone the other day. I said, well, when I first got to UCLA, I was a 6'3". So what? Like I don't even know what that is in meters. I should.
6'3", 199.
199,
191. Sorry.
191. Yeah. I'm about 6'3", and I was, 180 pounds, whatever that is kilo wise. So, I was, I always thought I was skinny, and my brain, when I heard the word skinny when I was a kid, skinny was equated to weak. So I was always like, I didn't like being a skinny kid. I wanted to put on some weight and do that. Well, I couldn't do that in high school to save my life. If I ate everything in the room, I was still going to be 180 pounds, and it just wasn't any way around it. I could get stronger and all that, but I was not a bulk builder. And then 1 year of college, I'm 6'3.5" now, and I'm 195. I put on 15 pounds that freshman year, and I didn't get any really that much stronger. I just kind of stepped into my man body a little bit. And then, I had to undergo a corresponding change in power. My first year there, I jumped terribly. I was, I jumped 2 meters 10 in high school. And I think the best jump I had my freshman year was maybe 207. Like I went down and I couldn't get off the ground. I was heavier. So my strength to weight ratio dropped. I didn't train, anywhere near as hard as I needed to, I don't think. And so, my second year, I got, my full squats were up over 400 pounds. I did, hang cleans at 285. I benched 308. I mean, I got strong. And then that was the first year I jumped 218. I just went way the other direction. 11 centimeter improvement over the bad year, but even a big improvement from, my best in high school. So it was like, okay, that is important. But I also had the two jumpers that were with me. God bless them. Del Davis, 7'7¼ jumper. Lee Balkin, at the time was 7'4". Ended up jumping 6 or 7 also. And these are great high jumpers. And they were always telling me, you are too, they didn't say fat because I wasn't fat. You're too heavy. I was too heavy. They were sticks compared to me, so they're always like, you gotta lose weight somehow. And I would have no clue how to do that. So I literally, even though I was at 195, I starved myself in some ways. Like I didn't eat any fat, if I remember right. I was eating fruit and I eat my protein and I love pasta and I do all that. And I was in that mode where I would burn everything. And then I was fortunate enough, in the UCLA kinesiology, which they no longer have that department, but at the time it was one of the tops in the States for sure. And maybe in the world, I don't know. They had great lecturers and all that, but we had those tanks, those water weighing tanks. So they would do the real official, thing. And we were happily, led down that road as lab rats. They were just like, let's throw them in the water and see what their body fat is, And I was like, I got in that thing and I just went, boom, right to the bottom. I mean, I was just sitting on the thing and I'm looking up at the top and I hadn't even let my air out yet. I let my air out and I'm sitting on the bottom of the tank and they come out and they go, your body fat's 2.86%. And I'm like, and I weigh 195 pounds, right? I'm like, that's crazy. I was like, I wasn't trying to be, that light, but it was like, I was trying to be light so I could get off the ground, right? And then we talked about Jumpman Westner, you and I, before we started, but when I interviewed the Jumpman, he's like, he feels real comfortable at 205. Like he wants to be heavier and more explosive. And this, I couldn't have dunked from the free throw line in my life. And he's, at 205, I've seen some of the videos, he's a couple inches behind the takeoff from the free throw line and able to dunk. So I'm just like, the
Do you
strength.
know how high he jumps? Sorry, do you know how high he jumps? High jump?
Yeah, he's jumped 5.25, which is I want to say 225 or 226. He's up there because the Olympic trial height was, the A standard was 7.525, I think. And then the B standard was down at like 220, like 7.2.5. So yeah, I know he hit the higher standard and he made it to the final in 2021, but he didn't make the team. So yeah, but he's 5.25, which I think, let's see, 220 is 2.5, 225 is 4.5. So maybe it's like 228 or something. I forget. But anyway, my metrics are terrible. Yeah, everybody would laugh because I mean, I've been a high jumper and a coach for a long time, but in the States, we grew up with the King James. So everything was just, even if they were measuring it in metric, it's like they didn't even trust us as kids to know what that was. So that was just 6'4", 6'6", 6'8". We went up 2 inches at a time. And I didn't, even when I was at UCLA, I remember they would just go, oh, it's at 6'8". And then later on, I'd see the results and it would be, 206 or whatever that was. Because I remember the when you go by fives, it was 2 meters was 6'6" 3/4, 205, 6'8" 3/4, 210 was 6'10" 3/4, 215 was 7.5 feet. 220 was 7.2. So it wasn't always exact. And they didn't bother to tell us. They would just move it up, and I'm pretty sure they were just going by the 5 centimeter protocol. So I wasn't always exactly sure what it was. But like when I jumped 7.2, they didn't go 215 and 220 because it didn't measure out as 7.2.5. It was 7.2. So that means it was, 218, so I don't know. It's crazy. Well, hey, Dario, this has been a blast, dude. I'm so stoked that you answered me back. You're very gracious and giving and sharing of both your time, your energy, your expertise. I'm super impressed with you as a person, the fact that you have taught yourself all this stuff. The stuff that I see on your feed is amazing, high quality. I see you working, I see other people working, doing high quality stuff. And man, just God bless you. Great work. I hope, the best for you. You're up to 20,000, 21,000 followers here on Instagram and growing daily, I'm sure. I'd love to do any kind of collaboration. So put it in there, let it rattle around. Let me know if there's any ideas that you come up with. I'd love to work with you, learn from you, experiment with you on athletes with their knowledge, of course, and continue to grow. I am not a gatekeeper. I am Mr. Curious, and I want to know how to get my athletes to jump, higher, faster, farther, all those things, and whatever's going to get them there, I'm going to use it. So you can count on that. And if you ever write the manual, I'll be the first one to buy it.
For sure. Yeah, thanks, Troy. I really enjoyed talking to you and seeing your side of the world. And I must say, like 7.2 is impressive.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a long time ago. I jumped 222, which was 7.3.5, put me at the number 4 on the all-time list. Those two guys I just listed, Dell and Lee. Dell was number 1. Lee was number 2. I think a guy named Rory Kotinik was number 3. And then there's me, and I actually got a step in front of Dwight Stones, who was one of the great American jumpers of all time, but he only jumped at UCLA for 1 year. So he jumped 7.3 as a freshman, then he left. And so I was able to sneak by him. And then Rory Kotinik, the number 3 guy, actually held my high school record. He went to Millikan like I did. So I actually ended up breaking his record, which had recently been broken by a buddy of mine. So it went Kotinik to my buddy Dave Wicker to me. So those are my claims to fame, but I never made it to the Olympic trials, which was a goal, and never made it onto Olympic team, which was a goal. So now I'm like I would love to get someone to jump that high, so
But
that
hey, it
they get
fueled your
that done.
fire for being a coach, right?
Yeah, yeah. I wish I would have known the stuff that I know now when I was jumping, for sure.
Sure.
All
All
right,
right, man.
sir. Hey, Dario, best of luck, man. We'll talk soon, for
For
sure. I'll be
sure.
following your work. All right. Thank
All
you.
right. Have a nice evening.
You too.